All right. I think we're ready to start into the evening. So my name's Christiana, and I'll be leading you through the event tonight. I'm a PhD researcher at SOAS and the president of Rethinking Economics within SOAS. And I'd like to extend a real special welcome to our four panelists today. So we have Nicola Scott, who's also the research manager for this book project here. Then we have Lucy Amber, who's a researcher at the General Medical Council. We've got Francesca Rea Williams, who's a civil service economist, and we have Earl, Chief Executive of Economies. So thank you for the four of you. We look forward to hearing what you have to say about this exciting book. Before we start with the content part of the evening, there's a couple of health and safety announcements I'd like to make. So in case of a fire, we go out as soon as we can, the way that we came in, and then we turn left and meet at Costa Coffee at the end of the road. And the building has been equipped with HEPA filters throughout, so that sort of keeps the air rolling. But please feel free to wear a mask or keep your distance as well if you feel safer that way relating to COVID. Did I forget something? Excellent. Right, so to kick this off, who would like to share with us your drawing of an economist?
Who's going to be brave?
Any volunteers?
Yeah.
Well, you can, or you can just say a few words on what you drew and why you drew that.
I guess I didn't want to fall into the trap, so I drew my female economics lecturer behind her lecture stand. But then I also just drew a big bag of money and a city.
Okay, so we have the big bag of money, which I take it is where economics is currently at, and then a female lecturer giving a lecture, which is what you'd like to see. Did I understand correctly? Well, I think that's a great segue into the book, because tonight is all about this excellent new edition, which is all about how to decolonize, diversify, and democratize economics, education, and the economy, hopefully. So the way that this is structured is that we have an hour together, and each of the authors and contributors will take a couple of minutes to say what reflect on the process of writing the book, and just pick out key themes that they really wanted to share with you tonight. And then after that, we have about 20 minutes of Q&A, and special hello also to our online guests. So there's a camera there filming everything, and they'll be able to also ask questions as well through the chat. So the first person coming up is Nicola Scott. Nicola, as I said, was research manager for the book, and she has a long-standing interest in the politics of economics stemming from her PhD research, which took her to Mexico and to the US as well. And she spent the last 15 years educating university students to think critically around topics of economics, but is also an activist for social and ecological justice as well. So Nicola, the floor is yours.
Hi, thanks very much for coming along. So what I'll be talking about, I'm just going to give you some stories about what drew me to the book, and then tie it in with some of the things we have in the book. So first of all, well, as Christiana said, I've been interested in the politics and the power behind the economics for a while. And this really started way back when I was an undergrad, which was a very long time ago. And the thing that really changed me, I think, was I got to go one summer to Guatemala. And I went there because I saw this advert in my university that said, oh, come to this language school and it teaches you about the politics and economics and history of Guatemala. And to be honest, I never really knew where Guatemala was and before that, we never really heard about places like that. So I went along, and the school was amazing, but it was so shocking to hear what had happened. So I got there a few months after their civil war had finished. It was about 30 years of civil war. And the thing that ignited that initially was this multinational company that was concerned that they had a government that wanted to have land reform. And the multinational company in the US, which is now Chiquita, they were scared they couldn't get their hands on the resources of Guatemala, like the fruit and stuff. So I was just really shocked to hear that, because I was like, why haven't we heard about this before? Yeah, I could stand up, yeah. Can we see on there? Okay, great. Yeah, I'm very small as well. So yeah, so yeah, I was really shocked that we didn't hear about this in our studies. You know, if we're studying about economics and politics, why not hear about this? So that was really bad to hear. But the thing that sticks with me from that time was I had a lovely host family from my Spanish school. They were Mayan Guatemalans, so indigenous people. And one of their sons, called Eric, he was 18. And there were 6 of them all in this very small house. And he said to me one day after lunch, he was like, Nick, I'm going to do it. I'm really going to do it. And I was like, well, what do you mean? What are you going to do, Eric? He was like, on Christmas Day, I'm going to have got to Mexico and I'm just going to try and get over to the border. I'm going to go to the US. And my heart dropped because, you know, we hear these horror stories about what people expect. And I was quite naive and young 21-year-old then. And I was like, why do you want to leave here? You know, you've got so many family and you're having your meals with them every day. And he's like, well, I can't afford to live here. You know, I'm working 6 days a week. I'm a mechanic. I want to have a family, but I can't afford to live here. So that made me question this idea of, you know, if you work hard, you'll gain in life. And that's the key thing that we mentioned in the book. You know, we critique that because that's what's really taught in a lot of economics courses. So yes, that happened. Then a few years later, I was doing my doctorate and I was looking at multinational companies, and they were donating crop biotechnologies, like the GM crop technologies, to scientists in developing countries or in the global south. And I came across this economics paper where they said, yeah, these sorts of partnerships are really good. They help the poor farmers to feed themselves. And when I got to Mexico, and I spoke to lots of different people, spoke to rural sociologists, people that spent time with these farmers, they were like, well, do you know what? This economists that did this research, they never spoke to the farmers. They really didn't bother listening to their needs. And what really was the thing that these farmers needed was just better storage facilities to keep their produce good for across the year. So they didn't need all this science, and they didn't need these economic models because they just didn't work in that situation. But what was more shocking was later on, a few years afterwards, when I was presenting my research at Oxford Uni, a guy hired from Monsanto was delivering a paper about these sorts of projects and how we can help these poor farmers, and we've got this economic data to back us up. And I got to speak to him later, and I said, well, my research findings said the opposite, because the farmers didn't need this thing. And he said, well, we just trusted this economist to tell us this, and the models look really good. And I was just really like, but you're a researcher, how can you get away from this? And it left me feeling really dejected, and I didn't want to work in academia, actually, and so I just set up loads of gardening projects in schools and communities as a result. But that was just one thing. I just started to question economics. And then so along with that, I was teaching at uni, and some of my students were saying they didn't learn enough about what they wanted to know about, like climate change and women's, you know, how do the economy, how do they affect women differently? They just didn't learn about that. And one of my students even said something like, you know, Bolsonaro's policies to build into the Amazon forest are really good because it means there'll be economic growth for Brazil. And at that point, that's when I saw the job for rethinking. And I was just like, yeah, this is going to find out why do we have these certain political, economic processes and models that justify some of these things. I want to know, well, how do they come to be? And that's what we try to do in the book. We try to say that it's partly because of who gets to study economics. You know, who are they? Who become economists? You know, what are the barriers to certain people become economists? And also, why are people's lives from different backgrounds, why are they not represented in their curriculums and what they study? And this then filters up. You can see when we have policies that don't even recognise things like unpaid labour. Yeah. So hopefully from the other speakers and from this evening tonight, you'll find a little bit more about the book and how, yeah, like Christiana said before, why we need to diversify, decolonise, and democratise economics. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. That was really interesting and so such a powerful story, I find, as well, of your personal experience, seeing firsthand the quite colonial and power structures that remain in the economy, but then also in the study of economics as well. And yeah, I see how it brought you on your journey to this place today. So, touching up from where you left off, I guess my question for you would be, what are some, you have a lot of experience in teaching and engaging with students of economics and beyond. What are some of the key things that you would like to see being done in order to start affecting this change?
Thanks. Well, I think some of that links to what we think economics does, which is to have a wide range of perspectives brought into the classroom, not just this mainstream growth is good kind of perspective. Acknowledge that students come with a variety of experiences that lecturers can learn from. And this is something we mentioned in the book as well about how to change teaching. Because having taught in high schools as well, as soon as you start to enable students to learn about what they're interested in and things that they're passionate about, they're only going to do really good work on it. You know, they're going to be engaged with it. So ask them first of all, just have more participatory learning is what I would really say.
Thank you so much. Then I think you'll have more time afterwards to ask Nicola questions as well, but I think now would be a good time to head to the next speaker, who's also a co-author, like Nicola and Joe are, of the book, Lucy Anger. Welcome, Lucy. So Lucy works as a researcher at the General Medical Council, as I've already said, but previously she was also a researcher at Rethinking Economics. And Lucy is an avid feminist, all about intersectional feminism, and she is also an advocate for menstrual health as well. And I've been told you have a growing collection of books, to which this is your latest edition. So you can be really proud of yourself there.
Yeah.
But now let's hear it from you.
Okay. I'll stand up as well. So what brought me to the book? So my interest originally peaked from whilst I was at university. I was fortunate enough to be able to go and do a volunteering experience in Uganda, where I lived with a host family, quite similar to Nicola's experience actually. And during that time, I was doing my dissertation, my undergraduate dissertation, which was looking at the role of women in micro-enterprising. And that stemmed from the experiences of working with people like small businesses across Uganda and looking at how the challenges that they face in being able to do business, particularly in informal economies. And it was really interesting hearing the difference in experience between the men and the women. And there was like quite a fundamental cultural difference in the way that women were being treated in business compared to men, and the resultant issues that they faced in being able to progress their businesses the way that they wanted to. And so that became the basis of my undergraduate dissertation. And whilst I was doing my master's, I came across this job opportunity to be able to look more into kind of what brought these systems into being, from a cultural aspect, but also the broader system of economics and how that impacts women differently to men, but also the Western dominance of the way that things are taught, and looking at how the intersection between race, class, gender, and Western centricism impacts economics and how it individually impacts people. And so I thought that would be a really interesting opportunity to be able to do this book. And so I applied for it and very gratefully got it, which is great. And so during the course of the book, I was fortunate to be able to do a lot of the professional interviews. And so I was able to have a lot of conversations with different professionals working in economics, academics working in economics, and hearing about their experiences, what brought them into studying economics, and then kind of through their process and the struggles that they may well have faced throughout their career. And it was really interesting, some of the findings that we found, which I wanted to talk a little bit about, was the things we found was that it starts really at school, at high school, or before university is a fundamental aspect of what brings people into economics, and there is a real difference in the experiences and the thing that I really found was that these ideas around economics and who can be included in economics starts really early on. So whether it's parents being able to share, this is what economics is, and being able to have those discussions at home. And this is a really difficult aspect because it starts early on. Then only if you have these opportunities to be able to explore it at school, or maybe if you're offered it at high school, then you can then go on to going and studying at university, but these opportunities just fundamentally aren't available for everybody. And these are some of the findings that we found when we were discussing with the school children that we were speaking with as well, and seeing whether they had access to even understanding what economics is early on. And so that this idea of the divisiveness of economics and whether you have access to it then continued all the way through university, and this is something that we can still see now. So it was really interesting seeing the kind of the class-based issue of who is brought into economics and who studies it currently, but also looking at what is taught, what is the curriculum, and what is being taught and kind of is continuing to then shape the economics of the future. And so it was really interesting being able to find out, you know, who is referenced, who is teaching, what do they look like, what's their backgrounds, what are they bringing to the table that's different from, you know, what's currently there and what's been taught in previous years, and understanding kind of the neoclassical focus of a lot of economics curriculums and how that's different from what's been taught 50 years ago, and how this has evolved over the past 50 years compared to when some of the professionals that I was speaking to were at university, and seeing how this is so significantly evolved was really quite jarring. And it then makes sense, you know, this is why there is more, you know, Black women from all over the world being able to study economics. And it's really interesting being able to then understand those who have made the barriers to be able to go and study it and then have gone on to become professors or are teaching it. They are much more likely to be studying a broader range of topics within economics. And so this honing down of what is being taught and what is involved in the curriculum is really kind of focused on who is in there and who is looking at different aspects and how this impacts, you know, women or the labour market or, you know, informal economies, and looking at why certain things aren't being taught and asking big questions of, you know, what are the barriers to enabling those sorts of things to be discussed. And so like one of the examples that we were looking at was there was a case in South Africa where they weren't being taught about their own economy, but they were being taught about, you know, how the whole of the US economic system works, or the UK system works, but they weren't being taught fundamentally about, you know, the natural informal economies that exist in their country. And so it's the real aspect of how can you make economics relevant to people who are studying it, but also those who have interest in it that haven't studied it yet? Because if it's not relevant to everybody's individual lives, which economics is, then you aren't going to bring new people in to be able to say, oh, well, I understand and I recognise that that's got something to do with me and impacting my life. And it brings more people into it that way. So I think that's something that's really important in the future of, you know, shaping economics of the future, is not just looking at, you know, who has access to it early on, but also looking at what's being taught and how can it be more inclusive in that way, and looking at how identity and economics are fundamentally interlinked with one another. So.
Thank you very much. I'll also stand up so that those in the back can see my face as well. So yeah, thank you, Lucy. I also have a question for you as well, and that is, I'd like to hear a bit more about your interview findings from that intersectional feminist lens. So what are some of the key things that sprung out that women face, and how did you find that interlinks with sort of gender, race identity, class identity?
Yeah. So particularly in the book, because the intersectional look at how people interact and identity interacts with economics is so vast and so broad and so individual, we decided to focus specifically on the issues of race gender and class, because they are some of the biggest issues, and we completely recognise that there are many other aspects, particularly disability, that we just didn't have the opportunity to look at because of, you know, it would have sprawled quite vastly, but it is definitely something that needs to be looked at in the future. And so some of the findings that we found were just listening to the perspectives, and everybody that we interviewed kind of had a different method in, and whether it was, you know, their parents were economists or had studied economics, and so we're able to then say, oh, well, this is what we studied, this is how it's impacting us. And so it tended to be that if, you know, your parents had studied economics, or the particular people that we were speaking with, they were from a higher social class, and so they had more availability to be able to have access to that. And particularly as well with when you look at the divide within the UK, so looking at access to economics at schools, from comparing whether it's state school or you know, public school, is really very different in whether you have access early on. And so that was really interesting as a finding, and also just the discussion of those people who were working in economics, and they were saying, I don't even know if economics is for me. Economics currently doesn't represent me. I don't see myself in the subject. And so I think that was really interesting, but also a good question to be like, well, why are things the way they are? Why are these systems the way that they are? And I think that's something that was really important for us to make sure that we were looking at in the book. So
thank you. And perhaps we can hear a little bit more on that from our next panelist, Francesca. So welcome, Francesca. Francesca Rea Williams, as I've already said, is an economist at the civil service currently, but she also has a history with rethinking economics. So you're starting to see a red thread here along the panel, because Francesca was actually a really active member herself of work during her time at university. And then she went on to specialize on the gendered and racialized impacts of post-financial crisis policy in the United States. And that is the sort of background that she brings into the book, really. And I guess also that background of someone working for government as an economist as well. So yes, I look forward to hearing your take on the book. Thanks.
It's so strange doing this in person, not having like my notes on the screen and stuff, so I'm going to cheat and have some cards with me. So why am I here? Why did I really want to contribute to this book? So I guess I was really kind of keen to kind of share my personal experiences as a woman studying economics, and to kind of expose the reasons why some people think economics is not for them, why they don't feel accepted as an economist. Particularly women, but also other underrepresented groups, not to try and put people off from studying economics, but to try and like recognize these problems and have them addressed properly, which is something this book has really done in detail. And it's also highlighted why diversity and inclusion is so important to economics, because who exactly are economists really shapes what is researched. And a lack of diversity of thought really kind of weakens our understanding of economics and society. So in terms of my personal experience, and kind of following on from what Lucy was saying about what research they did in the book, particularly starting from like an early age in like high school and secondary school. So back when I was 16, I had kind of discovered economics, and I was really kind of keen to study it. But unfortunately, my school kind of assumed that girls didn't want to study economics. It was an all-girls high school. But I managed to persuade them to let me go and study at another school, which is a mixed school. And to my surprise, 80% of the class was male. And I just generally found, well, right from the word go, in terms of my economics classroom, was always very dominated by loud, quite confident, often white men. Which I could see why some people might be put off. And then, as one of the few women studying economics, I found other students that weren't studying economics were quite judging me negatively and sort of assuming that I was a rather self-interested, greedy person. That's why I wanted to study economics. And I really felt I wanted to kind of carry on studying economics and prove to people that's not just what economics is about. It's really, it can be like a post-given world, so to say. And then I went on to university. I went to study at University of Manchester. I got involved with the Post-Crash Economic Society, which is what Joe was one of the co-founders for, and that kind of became part of the more broader rethinking economics movement. And I got involved because I was becoming very frustrated with my economics education and the sort of, particularly these sort of harmful hierarchies, which the book talks about a lot, being perpetuated by mainstream economists, and the economics department in Manchester is very mainstream, and just, well, there's a lot of examples, but one I particularly remember is being in a tutorial, I think it was microeconomics, going through a problem set. It was often like a lot of kind of math equations to solve, and no one was really answering the questions because they were a bit bored. But the tutor, who was an economics PhD student, was like, "Oh, come on, guys, you're not sociologists, you're economists. Like, you should know the answers to this. Like, come on, you're good at maths." And I just remember like feeling kind of shocked, but at the same time, I'd already sensed this kind of arrogance, particularly among mainstream economists, that it's maths that's what's really valued. If you're not doing maths, that's not economics. And someone else who was doing a joint honours in politics as well, I really felt kind of marginalised and thinking that I'll never be properly accepted as an economist, particularly as I was interested more in doing intersectional approaches like Lucy was talking about, and that's something more kind of cross-disciplinary. It's often used in sociology and not so much in economics. So I really wanted to kind of challenge these assumptions about what is an economist, and that maths equals basically better research. And then, as the chair mentioned, I sort of did, I went to do a master's in more heterodox economics, and there I found the culture was more inclusive, although it wasn't still not very diverse, but it felt more inclusive and open to different ways of doing research. And so I really was interested in applying intersectional lens to understanding particularly monetary policies, which are done by central banks, and I ended up doing a case study in the US central bank Fed, unfortunately kind of perpetuating these, focus of economic research on like US and stuff, but that was the easiest way to get data. It was just much more readily available for the US, so that's what I ended up doing. So I was looking at quantitative easing, which was used between 2009 and 2014 from the fallout of the financial crisis. The Fed intervened, I think it was like $4.5 trillion, basically electronically injecting money into the financial system, and then some transmission mechanisms eventually used kind of to affecting the real economy and kind of stabilizing the financial system. And I was really interested to see, because there was a lot of talk about how this pushed up asset prices, particularly stocks, and among kind of mainstream economics, there was this kind of acceptance of, it did increase wealth inequality between poorer and richer households, but overall it was no one was made worse off, so it was a good policy in that sense. And I was really interested to look at the US data, like by household, in terms of the race or ethnicity of the head of household, and it was particularly interesting to see in terms of ownership of stocks. So in 2010, which was like when the QE was, the quantitative easing was really happening, 1 in 5 white households, 1 in 29 black households, and 1 in 40 Hispanic households owned stocks. And from that, this like inequality, looking at white versus black wealth value in stocks. So before the crisis, before the QE, white households had about 1.4 times more wealth in stocks. And then by the time towards the end of QE, white households had 4 times more wealth than blacks, particularly in stocks. And so basically there was this kind of, I could see there was this kind of effect on wealth inequality, and even looking more at like other things like class, white working class households were more likely still to own stocks compared to the average black household. So consequently, people of colour were less likely to see their wealth increase during this period, all other things being equal. And I also had a look to try and see what kind of the gender implications of this, and actually there really isn't the data, and there's I often find this is kind of assumption that women have the same experience as men, therefore we don't need to disaggregate, when actual facts, it's very much the case that women have different outcomes in the labour market and other kind of economic outcomes. We've got women in that, okay, I'll try. So basically, what the point I'm trying to make is that although the policy didn't make anyone like directly worse off, there is this cost of worsening racial wealth inequality, which outweighs this kind of Pareto benefit that economists often talk about. So basically, like, you know, black households, the wealth wasn't increasing, but it's going to now, white households, wealth increasing, so it means it's going to take longer now for black households to try and kind of catch up with white households who've still got this increased unfair advantage, particularly somewhere in the US, where there isn't much social security safety net, so wealth is much more important. So I'm not saying we should not use quantitative easing, but that these kind of issues need to be considered. To try and think of policies that can then counteract these issues. So adding an intersectional lens kind of unveil these impacts kind of more broadly. And sorry, just to try and finish off. So basically what I'm trying to argue is that modern economics has to engage with this presence of structural inequalities, like racial wealth inequality in the US was the example I was talking about, and that, yeah, economic outcomes are basically on the whole determined by these systemic, historic kind of advantages and disadvantages different groups have, and without recognizing these existing inequalities, it means policies such as QE just reinforce or worsen these. So basically we need diversity of thought in economics. We also need a greater diversity of people in economics. And these should be more valued, otherwise economics is not fit for purpose. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. That was, I think you drew out really well two aspects I found. So one of them was you gave quite a compelling example of how economic theories and sort of rather dry looking calculations can translate into actual sort of effects of policy and how that can play out. I think it's good to have that sort of example in mind. But then also I really empathized with the first part of your talk when you spoke about your own experience of getting into the study of economics. There's certainly a lot of things that resonated with my personal experience as well, and I'd be happy to chat further about the findings there later. Before we go on to Joe, I have a quick question for you. What is your favorite part of the book?
Oh, wow. I really found interesting the chapter on like how economics basically whitewashes history, and that was something that was completely missing in my economics education, even in my more heterodox economics education at masters. Like the fact about like colonialism and everything, and how just capitalism has reinforced these inequalities caused by colonialism. So I think that's you guys did a lot of research, and I think it's very, very valuable. So thank you for taking the time to do that.
Yeah, thanks for the tip. I'll definitely be checking that chapter out afterwards. Thank you, Francesca. So finally, next up is Joe. So Joe Earl, right at the end of the panel here. Joe is the Chief Executive of Economy, which is a charity or think tank, I don't know how you would define yourselves, that supports those furthest away from power here in the UK to be able to better shape the economy and achieve outcomes that matter to them and their participation in everyday economic life. But Joe is also, as Francesca has already alluded to, one of the co-founders of the Rethinking Economics movement. So it'll be really interesting to hear from you. I think you've followed the project throughout all these years. What you brought to the book.
Hello everyone, it's lovely to see you in person and everyone online. Thanks for coming. I also have notes. I'll try not to look at too much. I think the book, really, if you boil it down, is about who creates economic knowledge and what are the consequences. Whose experiences, values, interests does it represent? And there's obviously the famous kind of expression that knowledge is power, but it's not often followed up with why is knowledge power. I think it's power because it shapes, in this case, how we think about the economy, how we make decisions, and ultimately how our economies are structured. I think the book makes the case, convincingly, I hope you will agree, that economics has historically and continues to be shaped, economic knowledge, by the UK, by Europe, by the US, and that's a huge imbalance in terms of where this knowledge comes from and what's seen as credible. And then on a kind of more individual basis, it's, you know, absolutely been dominated by men, by white men, and also by people who are relatively privileged. And in the book, it makes the case that this has got a direct link with then the kind of situation we're in now, the rampant, devastating inequalities that we see, and the kind of pending destruction of the planet. And I think Francesca's case study and talk today highlights how that reproduces and worsens those historical injustices rather than addresses them. And so I think the book is a testament to rethinking economics' journey. I was part of the group that wrote The Econocracy, and Kahal is in the audience here. And that was a book about about mainstream economics and about pluralism and about universities. And this analysis really deepens that and goes further and reflects, much more on the things that people have been saying. And I think in those two books, I think they're both important, but they both reflect that journey. And also the development of the time, the things we've seen in the last 6-7 years of rethinking economics' life. And I also think the collaborative process is really reflects the world that rethinking economics is trying to create, and really reacts against the dominant culture in economics. And that's really important that is continued. The fact that there were 10 contributors from countries across the world. I also think the book highlights how far there is to go. One of the most important bits is the note on how this book was written at the start. Because, I think the kind of work to diversify, decolonize, and democratize economics really involves, it's really nice to think, I'm writing a book, I'm involved in a book that is criticizing the bad people over there, and I'm coming from a position of being right. But this book is about reflecting on the fact that we're all part of and implicated in what we're trying to change. And that is difficult, but key to the book, and a huge ongoing journey and work that we all need to be part of. And my day job is about one aspect of this, around the kind of democratizing economics side. I think we've discussed about the need to bring new people into economics, and that is key, but there will always be people outside of university economics. And what about them? What about their experiences and values and interests? And how are they involved in shaping our understanding of the economy and how we make decisions and what kind of economies we try to build? And at Economy, we came out of Rethinking Economics, so we're a little bit younger, and I think the interest came from students very early on, we realized we need to change what's going on inside of universities, but also what's outside is just as important in a way. We do kind of popular education, which is not around teaching people economics of any kind. It's much more about saying everybody in this room has real and valid knowledge and expertise about the economy, and there are ways to build power in society to be able to influence the economy, and we can be part of that journey with you. We work closely with organisations and communities who are experiencing economic injustice, who are far away from universities, from policy debates, from the media, and try to build connections. One of the most challenging things in this work is that for people whose everyday experience is struggling to survive in the economy, the idea that you might be able to change it is, laughable, absurd. The idea that the economy is something that is changed by anyone who isn't, the Prime Minister or the Chief Exec of a huge company, again, is laughable. So how you find spaces to come up for air in the everyday struggle and build those kinds of connections within your communities, but also with others who want to change things, whether that's economic students, whether it's policymakers, whether it's campaigners, is the work that we are embarked upon. And yeah, it's woven into this book in terms of that key question of who gets to create economic knowledge, and how can we broaden that? And that is key to then this broader question of economic change and the force for good that we believe economics can be. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. I think that was such a nice way of sort of pulling it all together, and that I won't even ask you a question now to not ruin that nice moment. And instead, I think we can open it up to questions from the audience. So we have around, I don't know how we're doing on time, but I think we have around 15 minutes at least, perhaps a bit more for questions, either from online. So there might be some already in the chat on YouTube, or otherwise, if you're joining us online, feel free to pop any questions in the chat now. But also in the room, if you put up your hand, then my colleague will come with a microphone and take your question. And if you could also say to whom you'd like to ask a question.
Hello, thank you so much for this event. I'll first of all say I didn't study economics. Actually, rethinking economics event here in London, so I didn't want to study economics because we'll argue with each other. But I wanted to thank you for putting these messages out about economics. So as someone who hasn't studied it, I now, when people don't think about maths, I think about history, I think about politics, I think about behavioral words, donut economics, and I think about economics. So thank you for making that my vision of economics. I'm not sure who best to give this question to in particular, but I wondered who this book was aimed at, and if it's not aimed at, for example, people who are in graduate studies or in academic institutions. How did you, change your writing with that in mind? And how did you think about the publishing and distribution to make sure that it got into the hands of people who wanted to do that?
Thank you. I say should we answer that, or would you like to take a couple at a time? I say we go one at a time. I'm inclined to give it to you, Nicola, because you were the book manager.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think we still have to see whether we've hit the target audience really, but it wasn't meant to be just for economists or economic students. So that's why I think from the start it was decided we'd have a lot of qualitative, so interview research, have people's stories, because I find that they're the ones that engages people. Well, more so than, I know some people are into graphs and stuff like that, but generally if you want to, reach the wider public, stories are good. So yeah, we acknowledge there is some parts of the book that they explain the ins and outs of some key economic ideas. And as well, speaking as a non-economist, I have to read those over again and again to try and get my head around it. But the idea is that, primarily we wanted the book to be for members of the public to try and understand what these policymakers go on about, because we're put off it, aren't we? Because we don't understand the lingo. So just by having some concepts, have it clearly explained in the book, we hope the general public will engage with it. It's also hopefully going to be used as a campaigning tool for students to give them some ideas about what does diversifying, decolonising and democratising economics mean. And also hopefully to reach out to ally scholars to see, can they change how they teach? Because there's a big section on there's some suggestions on how they can do that. And that's what this book's really about. It's just suggestions. And we acknowledge as well, if anyone's reading this outside, an income-rich country like the UK and the US, and so we acknowledge that situations are different in other countries, and students and campaigns can tailor some of these suggestions to meet their needs. And it's part of what they call that pluriversal approach, where there's different needs that have to be met from different people in those countries, not just this one size fits all, which is what we have very much at the moment. Does anyone else want to add as well, maybe about the writing, Joe?
I guess the kind of core bit of research is the interviews with the students that Nicola did and professionals that Lucy did, and writing it did feel important to, I don't know, one of the key things is how difficult, how hostile economics can feel to people who aren't who aren't from that dominant group of being relatively privileged, white, male, loud, confident, so I think that even though it's not a mass audience in the way of going for the, but that felt like a really important, this book speaks to their experience and says that there's a student movement out there that wants to try to work to change it. I think, and we had, just marketing and how we get it to people, just work on on building relationships with journalists and reviews and things, and it feels different because of the pandemic, and obviously lots going on in the world, but just trying to kind of keep working away and getting it read by as many people as possible.
I think another thing to add is that, I didn't study economics either, and I never had access to it at school, so it was nice to have two non-economists who were helping to write it alongside obviously Joe's vast economic knowledge, and it was really good to be able to, as we were writing it, we were kind of trying to do the foolproof thing of, okay, if you didn't go to university, could you understand the whole point of this book? And I think that the key arguments that we were trying to make would have been clear whether you had an economic background or not. And I think explaining economic systems as much as we could in the most foolproof way for aspects that were relevant to the arguments we were making, I think was really key to that. And then we've done a series of different chats as part of this book launch, and being able to do some of them online made it really accessible for other people. We did one which was aimed specifically at economists, and then one that wasn't aimed at economists, and then last week we did one with a local bookshop, a radical bookshop, and had some a really vast range of different people that attended. It was really nice to kind of hearing people from being able to identify certain aspects of the arguments we were making in the book to their own lives, and they weren't in economic backgrounds necessarily either, but it was still things that were, you know, transferable. And I think, yeah, that was quite nice to be able to see that they were able to identify with it. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any more questions in the room? Yes, Lauren.
So I just wanted to start by saying that I'm a first year student, and I actually was having a bit of a wobble about continuing to do economics because I didn't feel like it was reflecting what it wasn't isn't reflecting why I went into economics. And I don't know if this is a joke, but I was considering doing sociology instead. And this talk has really, it made me feel like that I need to get to the end of it so that you don't have this perpetuating cycle. But people like me who come into economics to focus on, we talked about diversifying the people who are there, but I think maybe what wasn't said so much as the concepts. So, for example, like poverty is a massive consequence of a lot of economic policies, and it's not like some people believe innate in the system. It is actually caused, and yet that actually it didn't come up on my A-level course at all, and it hasn't really made much of an impression on the first year of my degree. And so I just really wanted to thank you really for doing the talk, because as well as it was kind of hard hearing that that's going to be probably the case all the way throughout my degree. It's really positive that, you know, people share their experiences. But my question was more about, and it's more to Joe and Francesca, or more specifically Joe, as we come into so we've got the budget at the end of this week. Is it tomorrow? Day after? I'm really nervous. What you were saying about how it's a struggle day to day for a lot of people in the current economic situation, that's only going to get worse. Probably after April, we'll see what happens with the budget. And so what I'm really interested in is how do you think we can keep engaging people, or do you think it's possible to keep engaging people as we are going to likely see this sort of like cliff drop in April, a situation where things are already getting worse? And the other thing that I wanted to say, and I know this is not quite the point of the group, the book even, but if you as economists who take an intersectional lens could add one thing or change one thing about the proposed budget, and I know it's a massive question, what would it be? Yeah, that was quite a lot, sorry.
Yeah, thank you so much for this. While you, Joe and Francesca, I think while you think about how you might answer that, are there any online questions that you'd like to share? Not for now, okay. We could take another one or two from the room in that case, if there's more. Anyone else? Yes.
Thanks so much. I'm also not an economist, although I've worked with economists. So my question is the problem people, i.e. people like me, elderly, white, privileged man, or is it a different problem? Because a lot of emphasis tonight on who the people are who are teaching. Is it just a question of the people? And how far is that then specific to economics as opposed to other subjects?
Thank you. Is there anyone in particular that you were addressing that question to, or just general? All right. We have time for one more in this round.
Thank you, everyone. I have just a question in regard to the pandemic. The current WTO president or director, she's coming from a development country. She was asked a question in regard to the IP of the vaccine. And I will connect that also to the COP26. So a global pandemic and a global human extinction crisis that we have. We already have a solution for the energy problem, which could be renewables, although patents are not open. and we had the same global pandemic, which patents were not opened with the excuse given that there was not enough facilities to produce the vaccines. So I'm not someone, just to preface this, that don't believe in climate change or do not believe in vaccines. But if we have global crisis, which can be sorted very swiftly, why is it that we don't open IPs? And for disbelievers, on the other hand, that don't believe in vaccines, but do not believe in climate change, what's the impact of this? Because, for example, in COP26, the Global South was not hearing any sort of excuse not to invest in oil and gas, because that's their daily living, and that is going to continue. So my question is really, why is IP not part of the economic consideration in making global solution imminent and swiftly implemented through policy?
Thank you so much. I think that ties quite neatly also into the previous question around are people teaching economics really the only problem here, or is there some wider thing at play as well? So yeah, we have those three questions. So yeah, Joe and or Francesca on the budget. Then are people the problem, or is there something else going on? And then the one around intellectual property and the pandemic, which Nick maybe offered to take. Would you want to start with that?
I don't mind. Yeah.
Or otherwise, whoever wants to go.
I think I'm going to do the budget question because Francesca might not be able to answer it working lovely. I don't know. I guess my thing is about trying to make what is in the budget more responsive to a wider range of people. So I would probably give that answer and say I would want the process leading up to it and then the outcome to be something very different. But I guess if I was giving my own answer, something responding to the massive rise in costs and the fact that incomes have increased in real terms for a long time. And yeah, maybe reforming, getting rid of universal credit and replacing it with some kind of minimum income. If I was writing the budget, which I'm not. Can people engage when things are getting worse? The everyday struggle is getting worse. Yeah, I think so. I think it does. The coming up for air is harder, but I think more people in society recognize that it's the structure and the system. So you've had Martin Lewis, who's done financial advice for a long time, come out and say, I can't give people advice about this. Like, this is a structural problem. It needs political, he doesn't say it, and economic solutions. I was talking to a group of housing association CEOs today, and they were saying, look, we don't really like campaigning or lobbying, but we have to now because I think like our tenants won't survive the next 12 months. So it feels like there is scope to engage people. And yeah, I think this sense that a lot with what's going on, a lot of it is seen as individual failing by people. You know, I've not succeeded and it's my fault. And there is an opportunity to say it's not your fault. It is the broader system, and that system can be changed. And I think that is a really important shift. So yeah, that's my, and then Tom, people, it's people, knowledge, and institutions like universities all reinforcing each other. And I think we've talked more about people today because that's how we often relate to these things. But the book definitely tries to kind of draw the connection between those and show how they reinforce each other, but also how they can be disentangled, hopefully, in attempts to change them.
Okay. So I'm really glad you asked, I know it sounds really geeky, but about patents and patents, because that's what my PhD was about, and I've never really had the opportunity since then to speak about it. So I won't go on about it. So yeah, I mean, the thing, I'm speaking as an individual here, not as rethinking, because we don't really research patents really, but from my research, it was clear that well, if you look at the history of that system, the patent system, so for those not in the know, it's similar to like copyrights on movies or records, yeah? So patents, you have patents on innovations, so patents on genetically modifying crops, because it's a new thing, it's not found in nature. And that's what I looked at for my PhD. So looking at the history of the WTO's agreement on that, so TRIPS, which is what we're hearing about with the COVID vaccine, look at the actors. You know, it stemmed from North America, the EU, and Japan as well, because they already had innovations. And it seems like it was a way to further their control over knowledge, and it added value to their knowledge. So Joe mentioned a bit about, you know, who decides what is valuable knowledge. So for me, yeah, I would love it if we had a world where COVID vaccines could be free for everyone, you know, and so certain countries don't have to pay more for them because they're judged to have not contributed as much to finding those vaccines, which is just inhumane as far as I can see. And likewise with technologies to address climate change, yeah, I agree. We shouldn't have these patents on things that save people's lives and save our planet. And I still can't believe we're still having these arguments many years after, you know, I did my doctorate. It's just the same stories coming again about, well, we need these patents because then we've got money to be reinvesting in further new innovations. But that just, it keeps out a lot of people who already don't have that technology to then be able to sort of create the technology, you know? And it just furthers the gap even more. And it breaks my heart to see it happening. It annoys me a lot.
And I think the key thing there is that economics, the relation is economics is what makes you go into a room of civil servants, or not all civil servants, but you know, or business people, and you suggest, you know, waiving patents, or and it's just beyond the pale for lots of people, and I think economics is what does that work of deciding what is acceptable and what is not. Because yeah, of course, you know, if you think about it, it is inhumane, but that there is a whole, and that's what the book tries to do, is show how the knowledge that it is the right and best way to run an economy is reproduced time and time again. And so, you know, good people believe that and think that's the right thing to do, because of the way that we teach and learn and think about economics.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I guess for good measure, I'd probably throw in, you spoke about institutions before, and I'd probably throw in institutions such as big finance and all sorts of vested interests that have an interesting sort of counter events to this one, and keeping economics the way that it has been for the longest time. Yeah, thank you so much. I think we're just about to close it out, so that we can all head over to nibbles. But before we do, you've all had a sign on your chair, sort of a yes, no vote. And I've been tasked to ask you whether coming out of this evening, you feel like you would now reconsider who is an economist whether you just immediately think of a barrel of money, or perhaps it's that other person or other connotation. So please, can I see a show of hands?
And what is it?
Okay, so I see.
And what is economics about?
Okay, and also whether it would make you reconsider what economics is about.
Which is the, yeah, okay.
All right, so I'm seeing a lot of yeses and one brave no. Two brave no's.
We'll
Three.
try, if you're, we'll convince you afterwards.
Okay, well, that will be really interesting. Perhaps you want to tell afterwards whether that was no because you think we're not doing good enough, or no because you already had this this impression before. But I think before I come to my closing remarks, I'll hand it over to Lawrence for a surprise.
Hi, I'm Lawrence, co-director of Rethinking Economics International, for those of you who don't know me. I'm just here to say a really big thank you to Nicola, who has worked for us for the last 3 years. She has started this project to lead this book, led on the research, and managed the whole project from start to finish. It's an amazing job for some amazing challenges. And sadly, she is going to be leaving the economics staff team. So we've just collected a few things to say thank you for all of the really hard work you've done.
Say also, yeah, thanks very much for all the stuff. I really wasn't expecting this, so thank you. I feel a bit embarrassed. But I just want to say thank you, Christiana, for an amazing chairing job. You're great. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And although I've not worked with you for 3 years, I can only echo that. It was really a pleasure to organise this with you. And yeah, I'm hoping that the audience also has enjoyed the evening so far. Okay, so a final word. Of course, now we really need you to buy the book. So there's a couple of copies over there. If you wanted to take one home, you could also find it on the Rethinking Economics website /reclaim. And there's a discount code if you wanted to buy the book yourself or wanted to recommend it to someone else. MUP, as in Manchester University Press, MUP 30, I suppose gives you.
It's on their sheet. So the sheet you use to draw an economist has all those details. It should have the web link for the book and the code as well. And we have copies to sell. I think we're going to sell them for 10 each.
Awesome, thank you. And yeah, with that, I'll release you from the evening. So we have vegan and gluten-free labels over there. And then there's also a bar where you can purchase drinks if you like, or I think there's tap water available as well free of charge. Thank you very much. Have a good night.